So by now you've probably watched the video of what is our biggest regret? Which project were we on? Which was our biggest regret? And the lesson there was, follow your gut. We had systems and processes in place. We still have them in place to decide whether or not a specific client is right for us and we're right for them. Follow-up to that is, what is the most successful project we've ever done? And that actually is a lot harder to define because we have obviously, we wouldn't be in business, but we have way more wins than we do losses. In fact, this is actually probably a good point, in the total time that Intellic Integration's been in business, which is since 2015. We have engaged with over 2,000 companies. We've done projects with 213 companies. So what is that, 1 in 10, right? I think we're at 213 projects. It might be more than that. Or 213 engagements. And then, multiple projects underneath that. We have fired 3 clients, and then we had that one, big regret. Where we knew that this client, we didn't believe the same things, and we did it anyway, and we shouldn't have, and we ended up having to fire that client. But what is the biggest success? And it took me a while to whittle this down to the biggest success. But I would say it's this. It was right at the beginning of Intellic. We had lots of huge wins and stuff, but this is probably the one I'm most proud of, I think. It's between this and another one. So there was this client that had a long ignition engagement. I think they had installed ignition on their plating lines, maybe 5 years earlier. They did this huge engagement. What it was they had an integrator that they had been working with. This is a huge company, actually. 1,000 employees in the U.S., so not huge, large size company. 1,000 employees in the U.S., 15,000 globally, something like that. They had an integrator they've been working with who did all their machine builds and all their standard automation stuff. It was a great company, excellent leadership. They had a very innovative mindset, family-owned business. Had a mentality of sharing profit with, their employees, and it was a great company. But they had hired their integrator, who was an Industry 3.0 integrator, the one who had been doing all their automation, to help with digital transformation. Now, they didn't call it digital transformation initially. Initially, they just called it their digital MES initiative, and there was no real higher vision to go fully digital, right? And I don't remember how we were referred to this client. I think it was through Inductive Automation. I think Inductive Automation asked us to talk to them, asked me to talk to them, because at the time we were a pretty small company. And they had this long initiative, and they were getting ready to drop ignition. The integrator hadn't done a very good job with their initiative, and they were getting ready to drop ignition. So me and another guy flew out to their corporate headquarters and we met with their leadership, and sort of heard about the genealogy of the initiative, where their dissatisfaction came from. This was chief operating officer, president, chief executive. It was all the C levels. And then they had a couple of production guys in there who were specifically in this plating area, where they had maybe 30 plating lines, primarily gold plating, 30 plating lines, and they had this digital MES that they had built on maybe 18 of the 30 lines. So we do this. We meet with the C levels, and I ask this question. I say, hey, after they tell us all the things they're dissatisfied with and kind of, what they're thinking, we ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you right now to rip Ignition out and start over from scratch with some other platform, right? And they said 8 out of 10. All of them went around, and, I think with the first guy giving his answer, they just sort of repeated it. They said they were 80% throw it out. And we asked them to give us a shot at showing them real potential. And basically what I laid out was, listen, I'm sure the integrator you're using is really good at automation, but digital transformation is a different animal. You have to take a holistic approach, right? You have to understand all layers of the stack. You also need to draw a vector that vector starts with your digital strategy, and it draws you towards the direction the organization's going to go, right? Otherwise, what you're going to be doing is creating technical debt. You'll take 2 steps forward, come up with some new capability you want, new thing you want, take 1 step back, take 2 steps forward. Now, sometimes a step back is inevitable. Sometimes you can't foresee, but using the right partner minimizes the number of steps you have to take backwards. Okay. And that's basically what we said. We just basically said, we can work with this integrator and we can bring them along. We can teach them how to do this. In this case, they decided not to do that. They didn't want us to train them. So what we asked them was, we said, what we would like are 2 things. We want a process that hasn't been integrated yet. So not in the plating line. We want a process that hasn't been integrated. We want one that you've tried to integrate but failed miserably. Okay, and we want one ideally that's here in the United States, so that we don't have to travel internationally. And they say, we got just the thing for you. And it was this injection molding process. And we said, what we'd like is we'll go ahead and we will do this integration. We'll do it in 12 weeks or less for this process area, based on the existing capabilities you already have. And if you are satisfied, your promise to us is that you will fully re-engage and allow us to take the reins on this journey. And the C-suite said, good. I think their total commitment was $55,000 with travel and everything. Wasn't anything crazy. So one of the challenges we were going to have with this process, we went out and looked at these injection molding machines. And one of the challenges we were going to have with the process was they used an inline tester for the injection molders. So there was an inline tester that was portable. They didn't always use, it was a vision system. They didn't always use it on a molder. So it was going to be portable. So that tester could go from like molder A to molder B to molder C. Okay, so that's one unique thing in this MES system. Number 2, this injection molder was, 2 of the injection molders were sort of like made by a mom and pop Japanese company. They used an embedded controller that they developed, and they couldn't get any support for it. Okay, there was a so we may not have been able to connect to the embedded controller was the problem. So we get kicked off, we line everything up, we list out our capabilities, we build out our backlog, we get started. And we decide what we're going to do is they had red line HMIs on each of these injection molders. And we decided, and those red line HMIs were already there, we decided, hey, we can use the red line HMIs to relay most of the data we need to us from the embedded controller, right? Because we were calling the manufacturer, we're calling the OEM, trying to get support for pulling the data from the controllers. And, you know, as is typical, you know, the OEM didn't respond. I mean, this happens all the time. Machine builders, you know, they're in the business of selling machines, and once you sell the machine, they're not really all that interested in supporting you unless they believe that there's the potential to sell a bunch of new machines to you. So, so this is sort of a differentiator thing here. So what we did was we found out where their offices were here in the United States, and they had like a field office in Los Angeles. So we flew a guy out to LA and said, you go to the office and you get documentation on how to access this controller from this molder, and you don't come back until you talk to somebody and you get the support. Okay, so we fly him out there, he gets a hotel room, right? Meanwhile, we're doing our development back here, we're doing the development at the client site. And, you know, we come up with a strategy using the unified namespace to basically consume the location of that inline tester. So when you installed the inline tester, what we were doing was scanning the network to see which switch that tester was on. So that was sort of the trick. If they unplugged the tester on molder A, it was going to be the Ethernet messages were going to come through a different Ethernet table, different routing table on that switch, and part of the identifier is which gateway is there. So we were able to look at what is the gateway. We were originally going to try and do MAC ID, but the engineering level for scanning the MAC ID for that tester was problematic. So we used basically the gateway address in the routing table over Ethernet, and that way we could determine which molder had that inline tester, and then we could incorporate that as a cell on the production line. Fast forward, 5 or 6 days, finally somebody shows up at that satellite office, and our guy's there to talk to him. We get the programs. They give us a little piece of software that allows us that we were able to install that made it an OPC server. And so what we did was we used Kepware to talk to the Red Line. We used Kepware to talk to their OPC server, and then we converted everything into MQTT and the Ignition Gateway. Long story short, at the end of the 12 weeks, we did our presentation. I think we were done at like the 8-week mark, and we did 4 weeks of just data collection, OEE calculation, top 10 downtime reasons. We built a bunch of Pareto charts, and then we went in and did our presentation at the 12-week mark, and they were blown away, literally blown away. It only took about 10 days after they started using the system for them to figure out to use the data they were collecting to figure out a major issue with the way they were handling temperature control on the injection molder, which was directly causing specific quality defects when you were a specific vision error that indicated a quality defect on the finished good. And so from there, we ended up going. They turned the whole project over to us. So the next thing we did was we immediately did a rebuild for all their plating lines. Then we did their assembly machines. Then we went to one of their facilities that did wire and cable. And then we went to China and did all their plating line facilities in China. We went to Central America and did a couple of their locations in Central America. What was absolutely crazy, fundamentally changed their organization, by the way. They were already an amazing. Let's go, guys. All three of you. literally all 3 cars were, that light was green for like 7 seconds. That's a social psychology discussion, by the way. We fundamentally transformed their organization, and there was a big, documentary done on, case study, big documentary done on this facility. And at the very end of the engagement, so when we get, took us about, everything I just listed out for you, took us about 2.5 years. I met a guy who worked for another integrator that was close. We were in Dallas and they were on the other side of the country. And I met a guy who worked for an integrator who was only an hour away from them. And that integrator didn't do any of the type of work we did. They were traditional industry 3.0. They were the type of integrator that basically accepted every project, and, they would try to make a square peg fit into a round hole, that kind of thing. They had really good engineers, and they had a guy there who, he was a transformative thinker, young kid, very similar to most people we see in our mastermind program. And he was a young guy, definitely less than 30. And so he and I sort of hit it off. I can't remember how I got introduced to him, but we went to dinner a couple of times, played golf a couple of times, and basically I told him what I was thinking, like, hey, I'd like to train your organization to be able to support the types of projects that we just did for this client. And then I want to introduce you to this client and have you guys take over support. And we'll just do We'll do architecture if needed. And he said, okay, cool. So first thing I did was I met with the owner of his company. Didn't really like the owner all that much, but respected him. Respect the guy, smart guy. He happened to have, part of the reason I decided to go ahead and partner with them and train them was they had an architect there that I did have a lot of respect for. Really super brilliant guy. And they had this kid that I wanted, that they were going to put in charge of like a small group to kind of seed this small group to support the types of projects we were doing. So once we signed, did all the partnership agreements, strategic partnership, blah, blah, blah. Basically the agreement was, we're going to hire you to work on another project with us. We'll teach you how to do what we do and how to support these types of implementations. Then we're going to introduce you to the client that we've already done this transformation for, and then you'll take over the support, right? And then we'll just be a resource, and that's it. That was basically the agreement. No long-term commercial thing or whatever. I think most integrators would have wanted a piece of any future project where we didn't care about any of that stuff. So I trained this guy, works out pretty well. Smart kid, really good with UI, really good UI developer for this other customer. And then we go and we hand off to them, and they take the reins. Now our client that we did the actual digital transformation for, sort of wanted us to, do all the support forever. And, and that was at a time where, this is really early in Intellic's life. That was at a time where it just, we didn't, we needed to move on to the next big engagement, the next company who really needed us. And they didn't. These guys, we had already trained their resources, built up their team, got them a bunch of huge wins. To the point where, this project was done as a big case study. And when it was all said and done, in just a little over 2 years, we had fully digitally transformed this company. So there wasn't every single asset because the client took over. But we did about 80% of all the assets in the organization. Single source of truth, for facilities in 5 countries, covering, more than 10,000 employees, in literally just under 24 months. Which, by the way, that's a super fast. That getting that done in 2 years is hard. The reason it was so successful was because it was the right part. Like, that company that we did this for, they had the right leadership, and they prioritized digital transformation. But most importantly, they found the right partner that helped them define their strategy and pick the correct technology. And to this day, I'm still close with 2 of the guys. The guy who was the director of digital transformation there, he's since moved on to another. Now he's doing consulting, for digital transformation. So he's no longer the director of digital transformation there anymore. He moved on about 1.5 years ago, and now he's consulting for a big firm. And then the young developers, I remember one guy, he was an excellent developer, actually, one of their developers, the customer's developers. He's since moved on into consulting. And the client, I looked at some of their, financial reports, some of their public reports, and, they've captured, well, let's say, double-digit numbers of additional market share, because of their ability to, they captured capacity first, and now what they're really doing is innovating into new products, which they had already done. I think they had something like 10,000 SKUs. But I would say that if there's any project that sort of is the one that I would hold up as like, sort of touches on all the things, we snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, which is sort of what our reputation is. What we're really known for is coming behind other people and salvaging. They were 80% going to rip everything out and throw it away. Number 2, we were able to define the strategy and hold the client accountable to that strategy. Number 3, we were able to integrate an incredibly difficult process that other people had failed on before. 4, we were able to do single infrastructure, single technology, unified namespace, and scale out that integration over 24 months in 5 countries, right? And last, we were able to find a integration partner that we could train up to support that client locally long term in that facility, or in their corporate headquarters. So anyway, as a follow-up, I gave you an example of project we have regret. What's a project, what's an engagement that we're really super proud of. I mean, there's lots and lots of them, and it was hard for me to pick one. I decided to pick this one because it was so early in our existence. So anyway, I don't know if this is going to be published publicly or if this is going to go just for the mastermind group, but if it's public, like, subscribe, comment, all that kind of stuff. If it's not, I hope this was helpful. It was a great, hopefully it was a useful bit of content on some of the things that you kind of expect, doing these types of engagements.